What I'm interested in is what made everybody get fat over the last, call it 100 or so years. Why did we go from the fat lady in the circus to 77% of Americans are overweight or obese? If you're Robert Kennedy and you get kidnapped by Donald Trump and force-fed French fries on the airplane, he's going to be fine because he only does that once in a while. But if you're doing this every day, all of this rancid fat and the ultra-processed foods that Americans eat every day, you're never getting the off signal. It's like pouring water in a bathtub with the drain always full. Eventually, it's going to fill up and overflow. That's what is causing our obesity epidemic. I'm the type of guy who I once spent my lunch hour in the salad dressing aisle of Whole Foods going through every single bottle. And I found one single bottle out of the whole aisle that was made with olive oil and no seed oil. There are also 2 studies that unintentionally compared cigarettes to seed oils, and the cigarette wing did better than the seed oil wing.
Tucker, let's start off having you give a general overview of why seed oils are so toxic.
Let's jump right into things. They're very susceptible to going rancid, right? And rancidity isn't something that we hear a lot about nowadays, but it used to be a big concern. Rancid fats are toxic fats. You want to avoid eating things that are toxic. And seed oils are, of all the fats that we consume, the most likely to go rancid and become toxic. And the result of that toxicity is, I would argue, why we have this epidemic of chronic disease.
So when we talk about rancidity, making them toxic, where along the processing does that happen? When they're being manufactured, when they're sitting in storage on the bottle before we buy it or before we use the product, there's transportation, there's heating usually, or not usually, but sometimes when we're cooking with them. So when does that happen throughout that process?
It happens throughout the entire process, right? I saw a really interesting talk, and the guy compared seed oils to LDL, right? Seed oils are 400 times, contain 400 times as many rancid fat molecules as an LDL particle does, right? Now, an LDL particle, we all hear lots about LDL, but most of us don't understand that a native LDL particle is totally harmless, right? So that's a pretty good thing to use as your benchmark. And if you are consuming vegetable oils, seed oils that are contain 400 times as many rancid fat molecules as an LDL, those rancid fat molecules are going to go into the LDL, and they're going to become atherogenic LDL, right? That's what your cardiologist is worried about. He's worried about LDL particles with rancid seed oil molecules in them, basically. And this has been known since the 1980s to be the primary driver behind cardiovascular disease.
So do we know specifically when the LDL is impacted? Is it with the oils becoming rancid and toxic beforehand, or once they're incorporated into the LDL in the body?
Well, you can, of course, consume rancid, right? I would argue that all vegetable oils are rancid. They do have a standard for rancidity. I haven't been able to find yet why they have that particular standard. Amusingly, but that standard is 400 times what your body is expecting. So that's a problem. Okay. They also are, so you consume rancid oils, your body absorbs the rancid oils. It absorbs them into things called chylomicrons, which are basically delivery packages. It's a type of lipoprotein similar to an LDL particle. And it shunts these into your bloodstream. And the first place that they go is to your heart, right? Your heart loves fat for fuel. So when you eat fat, your heart gets first dibs on the fat. So if you're eating rancid, toxic fats, obviously having that bolus go straight into your heart first place is not exactly ideal. And then from there, after your heart and your arteries have a chance to absorb it, then it goes out into the rest of your body and gets absorbed. And, at a later date, your liver gets the opportunity to detoxify it and then send it back out into the body in LDL particles, or in VLDL, which are turned into LDL particles.
We've been throwing these terms around: rancid, toxic. Zoom in on a molecular level. What specifically is happening there?
I think one of the most surprising papers that I found in looking into this stuff was a paper from the 1950s when they were trying to determine why you get radiation poisoning, right? Good question, right? And it turns out that you get radiation poisoning because the polyunsaturated fats in your body get oxidized and they're toxic, right? So radiation poisoning is effectively polyunsaturated fat poisoning. And they took these rodents and they injected, so the primary fat molecule in seed oils is a fat called linoleic acid. They injected rancid linoleic acid hydroperoxide, into these rodents, and it killed them very effectively, right? So since the 1950s, it's been understood exactly how toxic these are. In fact, they've used it as, I saw another paper that made me very mad when I first saw it, and after a while I realized it made a lot of sense. They were talking about using vegetable oils as a cancer treatment, right? So they would feed someone, the theory was, and they did this in animals, that they would feed you a lot of vegetable oil, and then they would use radiation to oxidize the vegetable oil in the tumor, and that would kill off the tumor, right? So it's, and what kind of effect does it have on your body? I mean, we know this in great detail, right? A rancid fat can cause another fat to go rancid, so it can cause a chain reaction in your body. This is why we have antioxidants in your body, right? The primary antioxidant in the body is something called glutathione. And if you, for instance, have an animal that can't make glutathione, it won't be born because the lipid peroxidation, is the term for rancidity, is if you don't have a way to break the chain reaction, it will kill you quite quickly, right? So if you are unable to make glutathione, you're not going to be born because you will die in the uterus. So it can cause other fats to become rancid. The rancid fats can go and damage proteins. It can damage DNA. Pretty much any other molecule in the vicinity is going to be susceptible to the effects of these toxic rancid fats. So, for instance, one of the more gee whiz, that's terrible things I saw is there's a paper talking about how people can become allergic to their own DNA, right? That's horrible. And they're not really becoming allergic to DNA. It's that these rancid fats are binding to DNA, and the body sees these rancid fats essentially as indicative of a bacterial infection. And so just like with poison ivy, which is also caused by rancid polyunsaturated fats, right? The poison ivy rash is the same process. Your body interprets this as an infection and goes to try and clear out the infection. Now, of course, it's not an infection. There's no bacteria or virus there. It's attacking your own body. In that case, the DNA. Obviously, being allergic to your own DNA is a very bad thing.
You mentioned the fact that after we absorb these, the first organ to be impacted is the heart, and then it goes throughout the body. On a cellular level, talk about how these are integrated. Is any of these fats being used for energy? I know cell membranes play a role in the integration of these fats in the body. Take it to the cell.
Yeah, so when you eat a fat, they're I don't know what the exact, well, let's just say there are two paths that this fat molecule is going to take, right? One of them is going to be used as fuel and be oxidized. And polyunsaturated fats are preferentially used as fuel. And they think that happens essentially for the same reason that your body has like a cascade of things that it will use for fuel, right? So at the top are things like ethanol, right? Ethanol is toxic. Sorry, guys, but it's just true, right? So when your body gets ethanol, it wants to get rid of it as quickly as possible. And one of the ways that it does it is by oxidizing it, using it for fuel. Okay. Glucose, same thing. When your body eats glucose, it ramps up its metabolism, because one of the ways it gets rid of excess glucose, which can also be toxic, is by using it for fuel. So fats are the same thing. In fats, there's a hierarchy, right? The polyunsaturated fats are the most unstable and therefore the most likely to become toxic. And they are the ones that are preferentially used for fuel. And they're used basically in order of the likelihood that they're going to become toxic to the body, right? Next step down, monounsaturated fats, like the fats in olive oil. Those can become rancid, but when they do, they don't become very toxic. And, that's one of your body's favorite fats is monounsaturated fats, because it can use them, for phase 2 that we'll get to in a minute. And then the most stable ones, the least likely to become rancid, are saturated fats, right? So when your body takes these, when your body gets excess glucose, the first thing it does with it is use it for fuel. Second thing it does with it is turn it into a saturated fat, because that's the safest storage form that your body has, right? And then it can either store it or it can turn it into a monounsaturated fat, which it likes to use for things in path 2. So path 2, if the fat is not going to get used for fuel, it's going to be incorporated into your body tissues in a variety of different ways, right? Every single one of our cell membranes is comprised primarily of fats, right? And they are packaged together using a molecule called choline into a structure that creates the cell wall around every single cell. And those, they're called phospholipids, are typically a saturated fat and an unsaturated fat, right? Unlike a triglyceride, which has 3 fats attached to a glycerol backbone, a phospholipid has 2 fats attached to a choline backbone. And there's some other variations on that we won't get into, right? But your body very much likes to have saturated fat. I mean, it's kind of funny, the idea that we've been pursuing a low saturated fat diet for the last gosh knows how long. Your body makes all the saturated fat that it needs, right? It preferentially makes saturated fat because it needs it for every single molecule in every single cell membrane in your entire body, right? The first fat is always a saturated fat. And then the second fat is either a monosaturated fat or a polyunsaturated fat. So even if you don't eat any saturated fat at all, your body will make all the saturated fat it needs because it has to have a certain amount of it for your body to exist, right? So not eating saturated fat is kind of ridiculous, right? Same thing with monounsaturated fats. That's what your body prefers to use as the second fat. And if you don't eat any of it, then your body will just make it from the saturated fat. It'll make it saturated fat from the carbohydrates and then monounsaturated fats from the saturated fats. Your body can't make polyunsaturated fats, right? And your body has to have a certain amount of polyunsaturated fats for it to function correctly, for your cell membranes to function correctly, right? Because one of the things that your cell membranes do is pump things in and out of the cell, okay? And these chemical pumps that your body uses actually depend on the molecular energy of the fats that comprise the membrane to work, okay? So if you take one of these pumps from an animal that has, say, a lot of polyunsaturated fat and put it into the cell membrane from an animal that has less polyunsaturated fat, it will run slower, right? So this becomes, I may be getting ahead of myself a little bit here. But at any rate, so those are the 2 pathways, fuel or structure. And the type of fat is very important for the structure. In things like your eyes or your brain, your body needs a certain amount of polyunsaturated fat in order to function correctly, which is why, for instance, if you raise an organism in an environment that's deficient in polyunsaturated fats, which they have to get through the diet, then they will have, things like low IQ, they'll have mental problems, they'll have problems with their eye development, so those are the two pathways. And it's very important which fats we're putting into those pathways, right? The polyunsaturated fats, your body doesn't distinguish between the two of them, right? And that's a point that we're going to get to as we go through this, right? Your body knows, for instance, that your cell membrane should be X% polyunsaturated fat, but it doesn't typically control which saturated fat is going in there. That's determined by your diet.
Okay, just trying to summarize some of what you've gone over here. Cell membranes normally have saturated fat and polyunsaturated fat to make a healthy cell membrane.
Right.
The problem is when we take in seed oils, the PUFA, unsaturated part, is going to be made from unhealthy, toxic, rancid fat instead of a healthy PUFA.
Right. And
so let's talk about what a normal situation would be when it comes to the PUFA, when things are functioning and the structure is normal.
Yeah, so it's going to be a large part of, there are two types of polyunsaturated fats, right? That we're going to talk about, omega-6 and omega-3. And omega-6 fats generally come from seeds in the environment. Omega-3 fats generally come from leaves in the environment, right? And I make that distinction because mammals can't make polyunsaturated fats, right? We have to eat them. So you and I get them by eating something else that either ate a leaf or a seed or ate something else that ate a leaf or a seed. At somewhere down the chain, there was a leaf or a seed that produces these fats, right? There's a plant that produced these fats for us to eat. So say we eat a cow, right? Cows in the normal course of things mostly grass, leaves, and they're going to get a lot of omega-3 fats. So your body has evolved to expect this balance in the environment of roughly 1-to-1 or maybe 2-to-1 of omega-6 fats to omega-3 fats, right? But roughly a balance. So the fats have a variety of different purposes in the body. They're part of our immune system. They're used for signaling. So for instance, when you get hungry, you are experiencing hunger because your body is taking omega-6 fats out of the gut line, out of the lining of your intestines, and turning them into basically a drug called an endocannabinoid that goes to your brain and says, I'm hungry. Right. Now there's supposed to be a balance there, and it's supposed to be, the omega-3 fats don't have that hunger causing effect. So if you have lots of omega-6 and not enough omega-3, then all you're going to get is the hunger signal constantly, right? Too much of a hunger signal, and that will cause you to overeat. So there's, your body expects this balance, and this is true in your eyes. It's true in your brain. One of the most interesting things that when I fixed my diet and when the people I was working with started fixing their diets based on my experience, is we all noticed that our vision got a bit sharper, right? And it typically happened pretty quickly. And I thought that was pretty interesting. I didn't really understand why until recently. But as you're taking up more omega-3 fats, the omega-3 fats are more active, okay, in your cell membranes, and they can react better to light signals, right? And they're transmitting those signals onto your brain more effectively, right? So it's literally having an effect, that kind of a fundamental effect in your body where it can affect nerve transmission, your vision, it'll affect your immune function because, they typically, the way there are some caveats here, but generally when your body has a immune response, it's going to take these polyunsaturated fats that are stored in the cell membranes and convert them into various different signaling molecules, right? And the omega-6 signaling molecules tend to be pro-inflammatory. They're telling your body to start an inflammatory reaction. And the omega-3 fats tend to be, don't want to say anti-inflammatory, but sort of resolution of inflammation signals, right? So your body needs both things there, both components to do this signaling. And, if you get into a modern American diet where most, people are eating a tiny fraction of the omega-3 fats that their body's expecting, well, they're really good at starting inflammation, but they're not going to be able to shut it down because they don't have the building blocks that they need to make these signals to calm down the inflammation in the body.
When it comes to omega-3s, dietary, we have ALA, DHA, EPA. We've talked about omega-6, linoleic acid from these seed oils. Are there any other omega-6 fatty acids other than linoleic acid we're getting through the diet?
That's a great point. So on both sides, there's kind of a hierarchy, right? There's the fats we can get from plants. On the omega-6 side, that's linoleic acid, basically. On the omega-3 side, that's alpha-linolenic acid, basically. When those go into a higher organism, then they can be converted into what we call long-chain polyunsaturated fats, which are the EPA and DHA that we hear about. And on the omega-3 side, on the omega-6 side, it's primarily a fat called arachidonic acid. And the long-chain fatty acids we get from eating animal foods. Okay. Plant foods don't contain those. Your body can make those from plant foods to an extent with, again, all sorts of caveats in there. But certain of these fats, if your body can't typically make enough of the omega-3 fats. So if you're on a vegan diet, you're not going to be eating any animal foods. You're not going to have a dietary source of these omega-3 fats, these long-chain omega-3 fats that your body needs. And so you're going to be deficient in them, right? Which can cause neurological issues, vision issues. Obviously, that's not a great thing. Typically, we would be getting some small amount of the short-chain fatty acids and then long-chain fatty acids on both sides from our diet. But as the American diet has been changed to reduce the amount of animal fat that we're consuming, we're getting most of these fats from plant-based sources. And for instance, with DHA, your body is really, really, really bad at making DHA from plant-based sources. In some studies I've seen in humans, they're unable to make any at all, right? And part of the reason for that is, the primary reason for that is that when your body is trying to make the longer chain fats that it actually needs from the shorter chain fats that it's getting in the diet, they're using a single pathway to do that conversion. And the omega-6 tends to block the pathway. So it takes up the pathway. So you wind up making excess amounts of the omega-6 fat, arachidonic acid, and you can't make enough of the omega-3 fats. So, that gets back to what I was describing before, where you wind up with a over allotment of omega-6 fats in your membranes and an under allotment of omega-3 fats in your membranes.
All right, just to clarify on the omega-6 side a little bit more, the linoleic acid, we're getting that through plants, including the seed oils.
Yep.
The arachidonic acid, it sounds like there's good conversion there from the linoleic acid, but we're also getting that through the diet directly as well?
Yes. Yep. Arachidonic acid you get from when you're eating meat.
Got it.
As well.
And we've been talking about all these negative health consequences of linoleic acid. Does any of that get pushed on to arachidonic acid, or is that purely good for us?
Well, that's an interesting question. Arachidonic acid is essential, right? And what that means in dietary terms is required for life, and your body can't make it, right? So there are other things like, say, glucose is required for life, but your body can make all the glucose it needs. You don't need to eat glucose, right? An essential component of the diet is something that's required for life that your body can't make. So arachidonic acid is essential. DHA is essential. EPA is essential, right? Those three fats, one omega-6 fat, two omega-3 fats. So arachidonic acid is a super important fat because it's used to stimulate inflammatory reactions, right? So if you have an infection, if you get injured, right, it's used in developing your brain, right? So if you're deficient in arachidonic acid when you're developing, you're going to have serious neurological defects, right? So it's a very important thing, but you only need a tiny little amount of it, right? And it is very dangerous in the body. When it gets oxidized, it is extremely toxic, which is why your body is keeping it around as a signaling molecule. But because of that, your body tends not to, it makes more arachidonic acid when it has a need for arachidonic acid. It doesn't just automatically make it, right? I mean, this is kind of a straw man argument that people often make when they're describing omega-6 fats. And they say, oh, well, if you eat, too much seed oils, your arachidonic acid doesn't go sky high. Well, yes, because your body isn't dumb for the most part. And it knows that this is a dangerous fat, but it needs it, but it only needs a little bit. So it's very carefully regulated in the body so that your body has enough of it. Now, what seems to happen is when you get inflammation and it starts getting converted, that process is driven by how much you have in membranes. So then you can get excess inflammation because you've got, your body is expecting X amount of arachidonic to be around and it's got more than it expects because you're saturated, your entire body is saturated with arachidonic acid because it has all the precursors that it could ever want to make arachidonic acid. And additionally, part of the way that the arachidonic acid in the body is regulated is because the body will use omega-3s first, and then it will use omega-6 second. Okay. So in a natural diet, your body is going to have a lot of omega-3 in your tissues and, less omega-6 than what we have now. But because we don't have enough omega-3, we wind up with a lot more omega-6 in our membranes than what we're supposed to have.
All right. So the overarching thesis here, what we're talking about today, these seed oils are providing us with too many omega-6 fats, linoleic acid, which is rancid and toxic, arachidonic acid, the body's better at making that as it needs it as a whole.
Right.
Do we ever have to worry about dietary taking in too much arachidonic acid like we do through linoleic?
I suppose it's theoretically possible, but I've never heard of a case in humans. I mean, it's in meat, but there's not a lot in meat. And people who eat nothing but a carnivore diet seem to be fine. So, I suppose if we went and did the same thing that we've done with seed oils, which is where so say you went to beef and refined out the arachidonic acid and gave yourself an enormous amount of that, would that be a problem? Yeah, it could be a problem, but nobody actually does that.
All right, coming back to the cell membrane. Healthy cell membrane, saturated fat, polyunsaturated fat. In an ideal situation, would that be a combination of DHA, EPA, ALA, arachidonic acid, and linoleic acid? Because again, I want to add this in. Linoleic acid is the bad guy here, but it is essential in a small amount.
Is it the bad guy? It's important to remember that pretty much every food that you eat is going to have some amount of linoleic acid in it, right? It's a perfectly normal part of the diet. It's only a problem when we have too much of it, right? Which is true for pretty much everything. I mean, too much oxygen can be toxic, too much water, you can get water toxicity, which people actually die from drinking too much water. So anything can be a bad guy if there's too much of it, or of course, if there's too little of it. Now, is linoleic acid essential? For a long time, from the 1930s, it was thought to be essential. But some recent research done in the Boston Children's Hospital. So this was, the work they did on this was in rodents originally, and they put rodents on fat-free diets, and they discovered that they got these deficiency problems. And they discovered that if they gave them linoleic acid, that the deficiency problems would go away. So they said, oh, it's essential. And then after a while, they realized that there was this other class of fats which are the omega-3 fats, and that was also a requirement. And they discovered that humans had a requirement for the omega-3 fats, right? So at one point, they have this medical food called parenteral nutrition, which is where you can't eat, so they inject, they feed you intravenously, and they use fat for that. And they were using, I think it was corn oil or cottonseed oil or something that's only got omega-6 fats. And these people started getting all these fatty acid deficiency symptoms. And they discovered that, people have that omega-3 fats are essential in humans. And they put this kid on soybean oil, which has some ALA in it, and that the deficiency symptoms went away. Okay. So the problem was they never did a test where they only gave long chain omega-6 and omega-3 fats and no short chain omega-3 and omega-6 fats. And they didn't do that up until recently, when they've been dealing with the toxicity of soybean oil used in this TPN infusion. And they realized up at Boston Children's that if you replace the soybean oil with fish oil, that it would eliminate the toxicity that they saw with soybean oil, right? So, for instance, you'd put, typically there are kids who are born with what's called short gut syndrome, where they have their small intestine isn't long enough to allow them to absorb nutrients from food. So they feed them intravenously until they can come up with some way to deal with that problem. And one of the things that would happen pretty commonly is that they would die of liver failure. And they realized that they were, if you replace the soybean oil with fish oil, that not only would the liver failure go away, be cured, but you could keep these kids for years on fish oil for like 5-6 years, and they'd be totally fine, right? Now, fish oil typically has only a tiny amount of linoleic acid in it, but a lot of doctors were concerned about putting kids on fish oil because they said, oh, well, linoleic acid is, essential, and this has hardly any, so it's got to be bad for them. So they did, aside from having kids on fish oil for years, right, a good test, they went back to the rodent models and realized that nobody had ever done a test where they just put rodents on these long-chain polyunsaturated fats to see if they would survive. So Boston Children's did this test, 10 generations of, I think they were mice or rats, whatever, with no short-chain omega-6 or omega-3 fats, only the long-chain ones, only the animal ones. And they are perfectly fine, right? So what we've realized is that the essential fats are the long-chain fats, right? The omega fats that we get from eating animals. And that the short-chain fats, the ones we get from plants, are what they call conditionally essential, where if you aren't getting what you need, your body can use these other fats to replace them in some situations, and in other situations to create its own long-chain fats that it uses where it has to.
Isn't it true, though?
Is that a long enough answer?
No, that was great. But my question with all that, we talked about the rats in the lab. To me, it seems like we'd only be able to do this in a lab because any whole food diet is going to have the short chains naturally in there, at least in a small amount.
Right.
Is that correct?
That's a great point. Nobody's ever gotten an essential fatty acid deficiency except in a lab or under the care of a physician, right? It never happens. I mean, arguably, we've done it to ourselves with the long chain omega-3 fats, but you're not getting the overt. Well, I say that, but, so one of the first deficiency signs that you have is skin problems. And there's a famous physician, Mike Eads, who wrote a book called Protein Power, one of the best-selling diet books ever. And he was talking in one of his recent newsletters about how he had all these skin conditions, itchy skin on his back, and I forget and back pain. And he was able to resolve both of those by taking fish oil supplements and eating more fish. So potentially he had become deficient in omega-3 long-chain fatty acids and was able to resolve it fairly quickly by adding those back into his diet, right? So yeah, I mean, I guess aside from that, you're not going to see, nobody's ever going to be deficient in linoleic acid, right? The idea that it's an essential fat, so we need to eat lots of it is just stupid. We get all that we need from the foods that we eat, and you're never not going to be able to do that. I mean, I guess unless you go on a 100% rice diet, and then you're going to die of something else first. So
you're highlighting exactly what I was getting at there. The fact that even beef, I think the number is 2% LA within beef. So to try and find foods that you would become deficient in LA, I don't even know how you do that. Like you said, maybe rice or something.
Yeah. I mean, rice, white rice, the point of white rice is that they've removed the omega-6 fats from it, right? Because those go rancid. And brown rice goes rancid very quickly. White rice with no omega-6 fats is very stable and you can store it. That's why we have white rice. So yeah, I mean, there's a disease called beriberi. I think it's a thiamine deficiency that will kill you if you go on an all rice diet. The Japanese Navy tried that in the early 20th century and it didn't work very well.
So coming back to our ideal healthy cell membrane, with all the different fats we've talked about, what would be the components there?
Yeah, so you're going to have, half of all the molecules. All the molecules are going to have half a saturated fat, and then in what they call the SN1 position. And then the SN2 position is going to be either a monounsaturated fat or a polyunsaturated fat. And the polyunsaturated component, the amount of polyunsaturated fat is pretty much genetically determined, right? But the omega-3, omega-6 ratio is determined by your diet largely.
And when it comes to the PUFAs, are short chains in the cell membrane as well, or just the long chains?
Short chains seem to be in the cell membrane because, because that's what we have, right?
Well, that's the linoleic acid, so that makes sense.
Yeah, the linoleic acid. So, and it's ratio. One of my big open questions is what did the cell membranes look like in those rodents who were fed no short chain fats? But we don't have an answer to that. I've seen papers where they manipulate this stuff and, your body gets to a point where it's super protective of these long chain fatty acids. And, when, you can't, the mother's body will prioritize delivering these long chain fatty acids to the offspring. So you wouldn't, it's really tough to get an animal into a situation where it doesn't have any long chain fatty acids and see what happens. And, there's just not been any research. I've seen that, all the lab rats are fed seed oils basically in some quantity as part of their fat, right? Soybean oil is typically the fat ration in the control arm. So yeah, I don't think anybody's ever done a study that would look to see long-term what membranes look like without any short chain PUFA fats in the diet. It'd be interesting. Obviously they're not needed because these rodents did just great for 10 generations. So
we've been talking about the structural component here for a while of the cell as a whole. Let's talk about the mitochondria, and we're going to get to energy too, but I want to stick with structure. And the cell membrane there is very similar to the outer part of the cell. So when somebody's taking in a high LA diet, how is the mitochondrial membrane impacted?
So mitochondria are kind of a special case. And the reason is that mitochondria are bacteria, ultimately, right? And so in the mitochondrial membrane, there's a fat called cardiolipin. So I mentioned before, a triglyceride. Cardiolipin has 4 fats on a double glyceride backbone, okay? And it's only found in bacteria and in mitochondria, which is one of the ways that we know mitochondria are bacteria. You don't find it anywhere else in the body, right? And mitochondria are also where because they're the energy production center of the body, that's where polyunsaturated fats are most at risk of becoming oxidized, of going rancid, right? So unlike most other membranes in your body, your body's kind of like, yeah, whatever fat goes in there is okay. Your body pays very close attention to what fats comprise the mitochondrial cardial membrane, the cardiolipin molecules. So for instance, linoleic acid is in mitochondria very good at producing energy, right? So, but it's also very susceptible to go rancid in the mitochondria of, the cardiolipin with 4 linoleic acid fats is the most delicate fat. It's the most likely to go rancid. And as I said at the beginning of this, when they go rancid, they start taking out all the adjacent, fat molecules and do damage to the proteins, and it's not a good thing. So, in your brain is super susceptible to rancid fats and therefore has almost no linoleic acid in it, right? It is very protective of the fats that it will put into the mitochondria in the brain. And there are some other variations in different tissues, but that I think are the 2 most extreme cases, right? The heart and the brain. The heart prefers linoleic acid because it needs to really produce energy. The brain avoids linoleic acid because it's so susceptible to damage from oxidation, right? What does damage from oxidation in the brain look like? It looks like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's disease, right? All the neurodegenerative diseases have a strong oxidative damage component to them. If you want to make the amyloid plaques that we see in Alzheimer's in the brain, you can do it by injecting oxidized linoleic acid into the brain, and the brain will very happily start making these plaques. That's obviously not a good thing. But that said, your body does respond even there to dietary, to the dietary fat content, right? So again, this is stuff that you can't really do in people, but in rats, they've put them on high linoleic acid diets and low linoleic acid diets, and they see the linoleic acid content of the cardiolipin in the brain go up and down. That seems to happen less in people. Same in the heart, same in the liver. And the problem is, we were talking about where do these things become rancid. Mitochondria is one of the places where the fats can become rancid, right? Because a mitochondria is basically a little engine. And I mean, I can't remember these numbers because they're just so outlandish, but basically your body's temperature is hotter than the surface of the sun if you look at it on a per square inch basis, right? Because it produces so much energy and it contains about the amount of electricity of a lightning bolt, but it's distributed all over all of the systems, right? And that's all produced out of the mitochondria, right? That was the whole idea behind the Matrix, right? That humans are this incredible energy source. Well, it's true. But if you put all these fats in there that are susceptible to oxidation, they're going to get oxidized in there, right? So you wind up with high amounts of linoleic acid in the diet alter the composition of the mitochondrial membranes, and then that starts producing these rancid fats like HNE is my favorite example because it's the best studied, which is a oxidized linoleic acid molecule. It can also be made from arachidonic acid, but because in practice you have about 7 times people eating a modern diet have about 7 times as much linoleic acid in their cells as they do arachidonic acid. So when you look at these toxins, that's where they're going to be coming from mostly, just because that's what's mostly there. So you can wind up there's a disease called an antiphospholipid syndrome, where you are essentially having an allergic reaction where your cells, so the effect of having these toxic fats in your mitochondria is that the mitochondria stop working correctly, right? As I said, it damages the proteins, can damage the DNA, damages the other lipids, and then they stop functioning correctly. That's a signal for your body to either discard of the mitochondria, what's called mitophagy, eat the mitochondria, or it's a sign, if there's enough of it, for the entire cell to do what's called autophagy, which is basically suicide, right? Or if there's too much of it, for it to get to the point where it can do autophagy, which is organized suicide, then it gets into necropsy, where it just basically dies, right? And autophagy, it gets eaten by a white blood cell. Necropsy, it just and sprays the cell contents out into the organism, right? So we have this autoimmune condition called antiphospholipid syndrome, where your body starts attacking itself. And what it's attacking is the oxidized cardiolipin that's released by these necrotic cells, right? Because again, it's a signal. Mitochondria bacteria, these oxidized these oxidized lipids in these damaged mitochondria are a signal of a bacterial infection, and your body can't figure out, oops, these are actually us, right? So it starts attacking itself. And I've seen, there's anticardiolipin, there's an anticardiolipin test for antibodies against these molecules. And my physician has made a practice out of treating people with these incurable autoimmune diseases by putting them on a low linoleic acid diet, and their antiphospholipid antibodies go away because they're not producing, they're not having this cascade of rancidity coming out of their mitochondria.
So in a normal situation, we're still going to have the linoleic acid. It'll occasionally bond to the cardiolipin, be used to produce energy, be part of the regular cell membrane. Again, we're just taking this to an extreme and saying if there's too much of it and the ratio is off and things start going rancid and toxic.
Right. And it causes cell damage. Again, Dr. Eads did a post recently where he looked at this great study where they were looking at visceral fat, because when your body, when you eat fat, when you eat, most things that you eat go through your liver, right? Except for most fat goes through into your lymph system, goes through your visceral fat, which cleans it out a little bit. And then, so what they did is they were looking at different types of people in an animal model where they discovered that the higher the proportion of omega-6 fats in the body, the more damage was happening, right? And it's basically turns into a death spiral, right? If you have sufficient amount of omega-6 fats, it's like gasoline, right? If you saturate something with gasoline and drop a match on it, it's going to go poof. Well, the same problem. But if you only have, like, say, I don't know, what a good example. metaphor may not be going, but if you have, say gasoline mixed with water, right? Blend it up so that there's only a teeny little bit of glass in there, and you soak the fabric in that and then drop a match on it. You're not going to get a flame, I imagine. Kids, don't try this at home. I haven't tested it. I'm stretching for a metaphor here. But it happens in people, right? You get too high a proportion of these omega-6 fats, and you start exceeding your body's capacity to detoxify it, right? And you start getting literally these lesions in these animals, in this animal model. They open them up and they have lesions in their fat tissue because the omega-6 fats are breaking down and killing the tissue faster than the body can repair the damage. Now, this happens in people too, right? I mean, one of the hallmarks of obesity is high amounts of oxidized omega-6 fats in the fat tissue, right, in humans. And you have a condition called adiposa dolorosa, which is basically sad fat or painful fat, depending on how you translate the Latin. And Dr. Kate Shanahan, she says, oh yeah, I can treat that. You just put them on a low linoleic acid diet and that goes away. And it's the process of these, when you eat these fats, they concentrate in your fat tissues and they go rancid there, right? They're not just stable. They go rancid, and then your body's got to deal with these toxins being produced in its own fat cells.
Okay, so you talked about the fact that we produce this sad or painful fat with too much of this linoleic acid. And how much of the obesity problem as a whole would you say is caused by these fats, and not just the pain of the fat we build?
All of it. I mean, let me say that there are historically cases of gross obesity that existed that can't be blamed on seed oils, right? But they were very rare, okay? I mean, there was a woman who was the fat lady in the Barnum and Bailey circus, and she made a lot of money back then. She was quite successful being in the circus as the fat lady. And you can go to Wikipedia and see pictures of her now. She's not all that fat by our standards. Right? I mean, it's really shocking. But she was rare enough so that people would pay to go see her, right? Nobody would pay to go to the circus to see a fat person nowadays, right? The idea is ridiculous. You can go to the supermarket or walk down the street. So yes, there's always been some kind of obesity. What I'm interested in is what made everybody get fat over the last, call it 100 or so years, right? Why did we go from the fat lady in the circus to 77% of Americans are overweight or obese?
Well, let's go deeper into the physiology on that one. You did talk about, again, the painful fat, but why, when these fats are coming into the body, and you also mentioned before that the mitochondria can burn them for energy. Well, we know there's other issues, but why are people becoming fat when they ingest too many?
Okay, so let's walk through the process, right? So you decide you are going to eat some French fries, okay? French fries are the most fattening food. Harvard did a study in 2011 where they looked at all the different foods. What's the most fattening food? By a factor of, I think it was like 7. French fries are the most fattening food. Number 2 was potato chips, right? And then way, way, way down below that were things like ice cream and carbohydrates, right? So if you take a boiled potato, the ingredients in a boiled potato are potato and salt, maybe if you're lucky, right? So what's the difference between a boiled potato and a French fry? Well, the French fry is potato, salt, and seed oils, right? So why does that matter? Okay. When you eat a fat, most fats have, as we were discussing, right? Animal fats generally have all 3 components. They have saturated fat, monounsaturated fat, and polyunsaturated fat, right? So when you eat a fat, your body says, yay! And the oleic acid, the monounsaturated fat, and the linoleic acid, the polyunsaturated fat, but only those two trigger an eating response, right? That's the yay. I'm a hungry caveman running around and I've got something fat. That's why they say living off the fat of the land, right? Your body's excited, and it should be, because that's survival, right? Getting a nice fatty meal means you're going to live to get the next nice fatty meal. So that stimulates your appetite and it makes you want to eat. And, that's all great. Then your body makes a chemical called OEA from the oleic acid, right? And this is the off signal. This is the satiety signal. Okay. So from the, so you eat this fat, your body has, as we discussed before, arachidonic acid down in your cell membranes in your gut. It turns it into these endocannabinoids, which are your body's hunger signal. Your body starts eating. And then after a little while, you're eating all this fat and you're getting all this oleic acid, and your body starts making oleic acid into OEA, which is the satiety signal. It's the off signal, right? So that's great. But if you have too much linoleic acid in the diet, the off signal doesn't happen, right? And then your body can replace the arachidonic acid. It makes arachidonic acid from linoleic acid when it needs to. If you're eating linoleic acid, then your body is going to keep making arachidonic acid and keep sending you the eat signal. But at the same time, it's not going to send you the stop eating signal, the OEA, right? If you give people OEA, they stop eating, right? If you take an animal, if you take like a rat, they've done this experiment in rats for obvious reasons in a second, and inject these endocannabinoids into their brain, feed them until they stop eating. They're full. They don't want anything else. They walk away from the food, and you inject these endocannabinoids into the brain, and they'll turn around and start eating again, right? It's literally the chemical messenger to cause you to eat. Okay, so you're eating your French fries, you're getting this eat signal, you're not getting the stop eating signal. And the next thing you know, you've gone through an entire giant McDonald's thing of French fries, right? Now, when I'm not even, when they used to make French fries in beef tallow, that you get these little teeny sleeves of French fries, right? Because beef tallow has hardly any linoleic acid. It has a lot of oleic acid. Your body gets this little, yeehaw signal from the oleic acid, and then it gets the turn-off signal. So you eat some and then you stop, right? You don't get that with modern food cooked in seed oils. Also, the linoleic acid has obviously become rancid in the fryer, right? High heat. And it turns into a chemical called HNE, right? Which I think I mentioned before, which is HNE goes into your cells and alters how your cells stores energy. It makes your body preferentially store fat, right? So you've got A, I'm going to eat too much. B, I'm eating this rancid fat that's going to go into my body, and it's going to make my body turn all of the carbohydrates that I just ate preferentially into fat and put it into storage, right? And all that's fine if you only do it once in a while, right? If you're Robert Kennedy and you get kidnapped by Donald Trump and force-fed French fries on the airplane, like happened the other day, he's going to be fine because he only does that once in a while. But if you're the average American and you're eating junk food all day long, which is full of oxidized seed oils because all of this stuff is put up on a shelf for 6 months and the fats in there just go rancid while they're sitting there. So, fascinating thing about these rancid fats, you can't make an animal eat rancid omega-3 fats, right? And I mean, think about it, right? That's rancid fish, right? What if you Can you imagine French fries cooked in fish oil? Oh my God, it's horrible. Yeah, exactly. Or if you open up a bag of Lay's chips and it had been, fried in fish oil 6 months before. I mean, it's appalling. Well, you literally can't make, I read this hilarious article. They were trying to figure out the effect, or this paper, they're trying to figure out the effect of rancid omega-6 fats on these rats. And the rats would sooner starve than eat the rancid fats, right? They just refused. As soon as it got above a certain percentage of the food, they were like, nope, we're not going to eat this anymore. So they literally had to gavage them, which means put a tube down their throat and pump it into their stomach to see what happens, right? Omega-6 fats don't have that effect, right? Rancid omega-6 fats smell a little bit flat, and a lot of people actually like the taste of HNE. And I think that the reason is because humans evolved to eat cooked food, and cooked fat is a sign of a cooked food, right? It's like I'm going to get a nice grilled steak, that my cave woman wife made for me tonight. So yeehaw. So that is actually a bit of an eating trigger.
Let's come back to the McDonald's fries, just so I can clarify this point here. So the rats would eat the McDonald's fries though, right? They just wouldn't eat them if they're fried in omega-3s?
Right. They will eat the rancid omega-6 fats. They won't eat the rancid omega-3 fats, just like people, I presume. I mean, there are cultures. My friend traveled to Norway, and his girlfriend's father gave him a Norwegian delicacy, the name of which I can't remember, but it's basically rancid fish, and they love it. And he was like, oh my God, fine, whatever. Different strokes for different folks, I guess. I mean, I have a bottle of fish sauce. Thai fish sauce is basically fish that's gone so rancid that it's not disgusting anymore. So you're eating all of these French fries with rancid seed oils. It's triggered your eating thing, and then it's triggering your body's storage. And if you're RFK, you've gotten it, and okay, so you only have French fries once a year. Well, your body's going to store the fat, and then it's going to burn it off. It's going to release it. But if you're doing this every day, and it's all of this rancid fat and the ultra processed foods that Americans eat every day, you're never getting the off signal, and you're never getting the opportunity to say, okay, burn it off, right? Let it out, right? It's like pouring water in a bathtub with the drain always full. Eventually it's going to fill up and overflow. That's what is causing our obesity epidemic. And we know down at the molecular level what's causing it and why this is happening to us. So now how can we address this process, right? There's a drug called rimonabant. Rimonabant blocks the body's uptake of endocannabinoids, and it prevents obesity, right? And it was a human-approved drug. Unfortunately, it also caused some people to commit suicide and to want to commit suicide, so it was taken off the market. But it worked, and importantly, it worked in animals and it worked in humans, right? Then there's something else called bariatric surgery, right? So bariatric surgery, when they cut the stomach, and the most successful one is called Roux-en-Y gastric bypass. And in the process of cutting the stomach and cutting out part of the small intestine, they are severing nerves. And the nerves that they're severing are the nerves that control the signal between your tongue and your intestine to make endocannabinoids, right? So basically what you've done is you've given yourself a lobotomy where you can taste these fats, but the signal to make the hunger signal never gets down to your gut, and it doesn't make the endocannabinoids, right? So those are two ways. Another way, which has become very popular now, is part of endocannabinoid signaling is the control of things called incretins, right? GLP-1 is an incretin, semaglutide and liraglutide, right? Ozempic and Wegovy, and I don't remember all the names for them. These very popular weight loss drugs now work it seems because they lower the level of HNE in your body, right? And HNE is the obesogen. HNE is the thing that is tricking your body into overproducing fat and storing it all, right? So this allows you basically to get off this carousel wheel where you're going round and round and round, and every time you're just storing more fat and storing more fat. If you're not storing it, then your body has the opportunity to burn it and to lose weight.
Not to sidetrack you too much, but one of the other crazy things about McDonald's food, I've seen at least some of it where it stays so well preserved even over years. And I'm curious if you would hypothesize any of that has to do with the seed oils in the food.
Well, somebody just, somebody just had a great video that I saw on X. I don't know if I saved it, but they gave this little dog some different foods. They gave it some seed oils. They gave it some butter. They gave it, I think, some tallow, and then they gave it some margarine. And dogs, being smarter than people, it wouldn't eat the seed oils and it wouldn't eat the margarine. It was very happy to eat the butter and the tallow, right? Linoleic acid is actually actually kills microbes, right? Microbes don't like polyunsaturated fats. Bacteria, they don't make them, and they don't like to have them around for the most part. So it's actually, there are papers you can find about a fat called lactobacillus, or a bug called Lactobacillus reuteri, which was this beneficial bacteria that sort of went extinct in the human gut over the 20th century. And they say that it went extinct because of the linoleic acid consumption, right? It got so high, we killed it all off. Because if you look at people, in America or in an industrial country, we have a very different microbiome from, say, Bushmen in Africa who eat everything and never wash their hands. And part of that seems to be because of the consumption of seed oils. And so, yes, it's not surprising that if it kills bacteria, that it's not going to go bad, because who's going to eat it? Aside from us, the dog won't eat it. It kills the bacteria, so it's just going to sit there. And I've seen lots of videos over the years of people doing that, like putting butter and margarine out on a dish in the yard, and then the ants will come and eat all the butter and leave the margarine sitting right next to it. So, yeah, they seem to be. And I mean, you know what? If I was a smarter person, I would have figured this out when I was in high school. My parents got divorced when I was 18, and my dad pretty quickly wound up with a girlfriend and moved in with her, and they left me in the house alone for a year, which wasn't as much of a disaster as you might think, but it did mean that I had to cook for myself. And I very quickly figured out that, the corn oil or whatever vegetable oil my mom had left in the house did not agree with me. And so I went out and I would buy olive oil or butter. I never, ever, ever once bought vegetable oil in my own house, but I would go out and eat at restaurants. And that was enough to make me pretty sick. But, even me, just totally clueless about this, I was able to go, oh, this stuff doesn't make me feel good, and not to eat it. I just never, until much later in my life, connected the dots and said, oh, that's why. That's why I'm in the hospital again.
Tethering back to our McDonald's fries, let's bring trans fats in. And the way I understand trans fats, largely they've been banned, but we can still have them in foods if they're below a certain amount. So they're sneaking them in. We don't have to go into that piece.
Oh, no, we should.
Okay, we can go into it then. But what I'm curious from you is frying in seed oils. And is that the main reason we're getting trans fats? And then bringing our tallow example back in, are there any trans fats when we're frying in that?
So let's say we wanted to do an experiment to see what's worse, trans fats, saturated fat, or seed oils, right? So we take a bunch of people and we randomize them. One side gets to eat animal fat and margarine, and the other side gets to eat seed oils, right? Liquid seed oils. They haven't been hydrogenated. They haven't been turned into trans fats. And we're going to measure total mortality and heart disease. Which group does worse?
Seed oils?
Yes.
Only because you're the seed oil guy. I know where you're going here.
Yeah, well, right. I mean, that was a softball.
But tell us why.
Trans fats people do better, right? And there are a couple of trials that have done that inadvertently, right? Because they didn't at the time recognize trans fats as much as they do nowadays. There are also 2 studies in humans that unintentionally compared cigarettes to seed oils, and the cigarette wing did better than the seed oil wing. So yeah, you can get trans fats. They can be made under heat, and trans fats are bad for you. Synthetic trans fats, right? Dairy fat has trans fats. Beef has trans fats. Those are natural trans fats. Those are very beneficial. It's the synthetic ones that you get in margarine and seed oils that are bad for you, but they're not what's driving this whole thing. Right. And we have the RCT evidence to show us that. And the other problem is we have lots of epidemiology saying, oh, trans fats are really bad for you. Well, if you're eating a lot of trans fats, what are you also eating, right? Trans fats are in hydrogenated seed oils, right? That's the whole point, is that you're hydrogenating, you're turning the polyunsaturated linoleic acid into either a saturated fat or a monounsaturated fat or a trans fat if the transformation doesn't go all the way. So it's impossible to untangle in practice in the epidemiology. Basically, people who eat high trans fats are also going to be the people who are getting a lot of the omega-6 fats from vegetable oils.
So no trans fats if we're frying in tallow.
I mean, look, any fat that is heated is going to undergo some damage, but it's a lot less, right? And tallow has a tiny little amount of linoleic acid. So the amount of toxins that can be produced from the fat is going to be significantly lower.
Okay, you said you wanted to get into the hiding of trans fats in foods these days, even though there is a ban.
Oh, yeah.
Talk about that piece.
So the regulation says if it's less than 0.5%, they can say it's 0. I don't know that it really matters, honestly, because if you're avoiding seed oils, the amount of synthetic trans fats you're going to get is going to be tiny anyway. And the seed oils is the problematic part, or is the worst part than the trans fats, right? So I don't really worry too much about trans fats, except for eating pastured butter, which has lots of natural trans fats, which you definitely want to eat.
All right, we've talked a lot about different fats, different oils. Let's talk about specifically the seed oils we want to be on the alert and avoid. We haven't covered specifically what these are, so people know.
Right. So, I mean, the shorter thing is what are okay.
Sure, or take it that direction.
Right. Coconuts are technically a seed. They're like a weird thing. There's a whole Wikipedia page on, are coconuts a nut or a seed, or what are they exactly, right? But so fats, plants being apparently, along with microbes and dogs being smarter than humans, plants know that these polyunsaturated fats go bad in higher temperatures. So plants from the tropics produce less of them. And if you take this, I learned the other day, this is really cool. Soybean oil, the farther south it's grown, has lower amounts of polyunsaturated fats in it. It dynamically alters how much it produces based on the ambient temperature of the area where it's grown, right? So tropical fats, coconut, palm, avocado, those are going to have the lowest amounts of linoleic acid. Olives also, although olives vary widely from like 2% from the Spanish variety to up to 20%. And, I don't eat a lot of olive oil because of that. So generally the tropical fats are safer, right? The rest of them are going to be, corn oil, soybean oil, rapeseed oil, cottonseed oil, which I hope nobody eats anymore. Basically anything that comes from a seed, except for palm, avocado, or coconut, is going to be a problem. Canola oil is an interesting one because canola oil has a lot of omega-3 fats in it, the ALA that we discussed before, as does soybean oil. That will prevent you from getting an omega-3 deficiency, which is nice, but it will give you lung cancer if you cook with it. So that's a problem. It turns out the World Health Organization has a nice big 95-page document on how high temperature frying will cause lung cancer. And they've got an enormous amount of data on humans, mostly Chinese women who never smoked and then came down with lung cancer. And they figured out that it's a direct relationship between how much they cooked with vegetable oils and their likelihood to get lung cancer, because the omega-3 fats are super susceptible to oxidizing, and they oxidize into something that causes, that's a carcinogen. So, and then you get to breathe it while you're cooking it, right? So yes, canola oil, wonderful. Just don't cook with it.
While we're talking about omega-3 there in canola oil, you brought up Kate Shanahan earlier, and one of her unique pushes in this angle of polyunsaturated fats is that we need to be aware of the omega-3s as well, because they're even more unstable than linoleic acid. So bring that in and talk about how you feel about stability of omega-3s. And again, her angle is a little bit different. Most people are talking about it the way you have been, but she's also saying we gotta bring them into the discussion as well.
Well, the short chain omega-3 fats, I agree with that. Clearly, you don't want to cook with them, right? But let's talk about the longer chain omega-3 fats, right? I've not seen any evidence of a toxic effect of eating too much omega-3 fat, with the caveat that if you drink a lot of alcohol at the same time, that does appear to be a problem, right? Which may explain, like, Sweden, where they're eating fish and drinking all winter, or whatever, the northern Scandinavian areas where they seem to have a correlation between some problems. I mean, if you look at like the Eskimos, the Greenlanders, the native Greenlanders, the Japanese, right? There's no evidence of negative outcome from eating, the Japanese were eating stored fish for most of their history, right? Sushi is relatively recent innovation. And in fact, sushi was originally developed as a way to store fish so you could eat it later. So I've not seen any evidence. If you look at it at the molecular level, the HNE that's produced from omega-6 fats has an analog in the omega-3 world. It's called HHE, 4-hydroxyhexanol. And HNE is far more toxic than HHE. HHE just doesn't seem to have the toxic effects, right? And another toxin that's can be produced from both fats. It's called malondialdehyde, MDA. MDA seems to be much less toxic. It's primarily made from omega-6 fats, but it also seems to be much less toxic than the HNE that's made from omega-6 fats. So, I would agree. I'm not Norwegian, where eating that fish dish is a part of my culture, and they should probably continue doing it. But I generally think that you should avoid eating anything that's gone rancid, but I wouldn't really sweat the omega-3 fats, right? I mean, it's actually, it's funny. one of the biggest cheerleaders for consuming omega-6 fats is this guy, Dariush Mozaffarian, who's he was the dean of nutrition at Tufts. I don't know if he is anymore, but and he used to be at Harvard, where he produced that potato paper showing, he wrote the potato paper showing that potatoes are the most obesogenic food. And he wrote another paper looking at fish. And he said that fish are great, eat lots of fish. The only exception appears to be fried fish. Well, what's different with fried fish? You're not frying fish in fish oil. You're frying it in vegetable oils, of course. But, cooking fish, other than frying them in vegetable oils, they seem to be fine. So, yeah, I don't think, don't eat rancid food. That's just a good general principle. I don't really see omega-3 fats being nearly as much of a cause for concern. I think most people, the problem is they're not getting enough omega-3 fats. And I think, most of us, people like Dr. Eads, who I think eats an otherwise very healthy diet and found himself, I think, deficient in omega-3 fats living here in America. Because of the way we feed our animals, unless you're going out of your way to get enough omega-3, you may not be getting enough omega-3.
How do you feel about supplementing with a fish oil? And I've heard mixed things about rancidity. A lot more people saying that the oils are often rancid. So talk about that from both perspectives. If it's a valuable supplement, if rancidity is an issue, share your thoughts.
Yeah, I did I can't remember his last name. I did a podcast with a guy who wrote a paper for Consumer Reports on rancid fish oils. And rancid fish oils used to be more of a problem. They went through and they analyzed all these fish oils on the market, and they found out that they're generally not much of a problem anymore, except for flavored fish oils. And vitamin C, for instance, if you've got a lemon flavored fish oil, which is apparently a thing, vitamin C can be a pro-oxidant. I mean, it's typically thought of as an antioxidant, but it can be a pro-oxidant. If you want to cause oxidation in an organism, you give it vitamin C and iron, and that kicks off a pro-oxidant reaction in the polyunsaturated fats. So, my advice to people when I fixed my diet and I started supplementing with omega-3 fats, I got some fermented cod liver oil, which fermented probably had some rancid fats in it, but it tasted okay because I ate it with a spoon. So I would say, don't eat the tablets, or if you eat the tablets or the capsules, bite them, right? And if it smells rancid, it's rancid. We're very good at detecting that, and don't eat it then, right? From what I've read, you're best off eating fish. Fish has omega-3 and phospholipids, whereas fish oil only has omega-3 in triglycerides. And in order to best absorb the omega-3 fats, your body needs the phospholipid form, which they filter out of the oil form, So fish has both. The oils only have the triglycerides, and you want both. There is some evidence showing that longer-term consumption of fish oils is problematic. But what I would, I think if you have a deficiency, like I did when I fixed my diet, and like it seems Dr. Eads did, I went for probably 6 months where I couldn't get to bed at night without my spoonful of the fermented cod liver oil. And then at the end of that 6 months, I looked at it one day and I was like, ooh, and I've never had another bit since, right? I love sardines. I eat canned sardines all the time, packed in water, so you're not getting the sketchy oils. I mean, even the olive oil, who knows if it's really olive oil. So yeah, I would definitely say, fine, if you're fixing your diet, if you have overt deficiency symptoms like itchy skin or potentially, I was going through a period where I had a lot of broken bones, 6 broken bones over 2 years. I probably was like borderline osteopenic, and, the fermented cod liver oil not only has the omega-3 fats, but it's got vitamin A and vitamin D. And I've never had a problem with a broken bone. That kind of ended at that point. So hopefully that was put away by that supplementation.
So you're off the cod liver oil now. Are you taking any other supplements?
No, I'm not a big fan of supplements. I took folate 2 years ago, and I grew an extra tooth in my mouth. That was really bad and super painful.
Wow. Talk more about that.
Yeah. So my mother told me that she thought she had a folate. There's a folate gene mutation where you don't absorb enough folate. And she said that she thought she had it, but she couldn't really remember the details. And now when I was young, in my 20s, had said to me, I think I have a problem eating wheat. And I was like, oh, it's mom's. The whole reason I never had an interest growing up until like my 42 in diet was because of my mother, because she was on Weight Watchers. She was on the Weight Watchers weight roller coaster, and she was always doing all these crazy diet stuff and just turned me off the whole field. But she did, when I was in my 20s, tell me that she thought she had a problem eating wheat. And I am super gluten intolerant. And I, again, should have listened to her. So this time around, I said, okay, I'm going to listen to mom and I'll try this for a little while. So I got some folate. I have a blog post about it if anybody wants to go repeat my experiment. So the first thing that happened was I was putting my shoe on, and I always put my shoes on standing up. And I just pulled my back like nothing that has ever happened in my life. It was brutal. I mean, it was felt like somebody stabbed me in the back. And I was like, okay, so, whatever. And then I got this ulcer in my mouth, and there was a lump under the ulcer. And then as it progressed, this piece of bone started sticking out of the middle of the ulcer, not where a tooth should be. And then I got another one. And so the only thing I'd really changed was trying to take this folate. So I stopped taking the folate. Luckily, the bone spur thing, whatever it was, broke off when I was eating some leftover steak one day. And it healed up pretty quickly after that. And I've not had any problems since then. So yes, I'm very much a fan of, if you know you're deficient, then fine, take a supplement. But ideally, other than that, everything should be in the food that you're eating if you've got a decent diet. And I mean, caveats, vitamin D, if you're in the winter, if you don't get a lot of sun, if you're African-American ancestry and you're not Elon Musk and you're, likely to be vitamin D deficient, fine, take it in the winter. Don't mega dose on it, because that can have. So, generally, yeah, I'm not a big fan of supplements. I don't take, the only thing I take that you could call a supplement is I put collagen or gelatin in my coffee in the morning, just because I've, read at some point that could be beneficial for joint health, and seems to help. Haven't had any negative issue. The only problem with gelatin in your coffee is that if you let it go cold, it turns into coffee jello and you can't drink it anymore.
For somebody that feels like they need a top up and they're going to experiment with omega-3s, any thoughts on krill oil? Obviously, you're a fan of fermented cod liver oil. Again, short term.
Yeah.
Or algae oil, because they have these algae oils now that are EPA, DHA.
Yeah. I mean, as we were discussing, they're all plant fats, right? So algae is a little green planty creature that lives in the ocean, and it produces the omega-3 fats. It's the leaf, right? So that's fine if you want to take that. I mean, smart vegans now recommend that all vegans take a DHA supplement like that, because they can't produce enough DHA from the alpha linoleic acid, the short chain omega-3 fats that you get in something like canola oil. So yeah, that's fine. Krill oil, again, fine. I don't know. I'm going to wager that the the oils generally, again, don't have the phospholipids. So you're going to be better off by eating fish than taking one of these oils and just getting the triglycerides.
So whether it be fish or another animal, in general, the fats from animals are good, but animal quality does matter, except for in one instance, which are cows because of the way they digest. So talk about that, different levels of linoleic acid in animals depending on what they're eating.
Yeah, it matters in all animals, even in cows.
But to less of an extent, correct?
Well, let's get there. So monogastric animals, which means an animal with a single stomach, you, me, chickens, pigs, we eat the fat, we absorb the fat, right? Whatever goes in our mouth is what our body absorbs. So the more seed oils you eat or you feed to your pig or your chicken, the higher the level they're going to have in their body. And essentially they become just little bags of seed oils running around. That's a problem. Both pork and chicken has been found to be associated with obesity in humans in epidemiological studies. I haven't seen any RCTs in that. Although some of the physicians I know have, my doctor who's in Josh Durham, who's in Boise, Idaho, he treats his patients with a low linoleic, a low omega-6 carnivore diet, right? And he's keeping them away from the concentrated sources of omega-6 fats, which sadly includes bacon. I love bacon too, but it's just a fact of life that the feed conditions for pigs is horrible in this country. I mean, if you can actually get pastured bacon, or pastured pork, it's phenomenal. It doesn't even taste like the same animal. Now, this is something that happens in humans, and I've not ever been able to find out a good answer why, but the more omega-6 fats you eat, even if you're eating sufficient omega-3 fats, it lowers the amount of omega-3 fat in your body, right? So this happens to people, and they've shown in people that if you lower the amount of omega-6 fats in the diet and keep the amount of omega-3 fats that they're eating constant, the serum levels of omega-3 will go up. And I think it's because of collateral damage. I don't know for sure. That's my guess. That happens now. Cows and ruminants like goats have 4 stomachs, right? They're not monogastric. They have 4 stomachs. And one of those stomachs is basically a microbial reactor that allows them to digest things like cellulose that people can't digest very well. And in the course of that happening, if you feed them grains, those microbes will alter the fats in the grains, alter the linoleic acid into other fats, one of which is conjugated linoleic acid, which is a beneficial trans fat, by the way. So what happens to cattle is that grain-finished cattle will have lower levels of omega-3 and higher levels of omega-6, much, much lower than, say, pork or chicken. But the omega-6 goes down, right? So on its own, wild game is a pretty good source of omega-3 fats. And that's where most of us would get omega-3 fats. Because if you look at like Africa, most of the continent is nowhere near the ocean. They weren't eating seafood. They were getting their omega-3 fats from the ruminants that they were eating. Unfortunately, in America, in our quest to totally destroy our food supply by feeding grains to cattle and, dairy, typically industrial dairy, they've got little cows in a barn and they're feeding in corn at the end, and they don't even get to go outside and eat the grass. They're going to have very low levels of omega-3 and the high levels of omega-6 for a cow, right? Which is so if that's what you have to eat. And, I'm sure that I haven't talked to Dr. Eads about that, but that's probably what got him in trouble with the apparent omega-3 deficiency is he's probably eating industrial chicken, pork, and beef in his low-carb diet, and he wasn't getting enough omega-3 from it. So if that's what you're eating, make sure you're getting fish, right? Some kind of fish or fish oil, if that's what you insist on doing, although I don't think it's optimal. What he also told me, which I was super upset about, is that the FDA requirement for grass-fed labeling, you can feed them, you can still grain finish them, but if you use half the amount of a normal cow, a grain finished cow, you can call them grass-fed and grass-finished, even though they're not. And I don't know what the effect on the fats is, but that really pisses me off. So the grass-fed, that's a problem. So I used to tell people, just eat grass-fed beef and grass-fed dairy and you'll be fine. But apparently that's a fraud perpetrated by the FDA. So, more of us may need to eat fish than I would have told you 2 weeks ago. So that's kind of frustrating. And I haven't really looked into that. I haven't found any comparisons of the fats in this faux grass-fed beef versus grain finished beef and actual grass-fed beef to see what difference it makes. But that's definitely something that folks should be cognizant of.
I'm definitely an advocate for myself and others eating the best we can get. But the point I was trying to emphasize is that, say you're at a restaurant or at a party with friends, you're going to be better off sticking with beef over pork, chicken, fish, if we're talking about conventional. Because to me,
better off
go ahead.
Beef and then fish, any kind of fish, even farm-raised fish, and then chicken and pork, or pork and chicken, however you want to order it.
Okay. That's news to me about the fish, because I thought the fish, when they were farmed, could be really high in LA.
Well, again, they will be high in LA for a fish, but they will be far lower than a chicken or a pig, right? And they will have a lot more omega-3 than a chicken or a pig. One of the scientists I interviewed, his comment was salmon have the good sense to die if you don't give them enough omega-3 fats. So while they do give them supplemental soybean oil feed, they have to give them a certain amount of omega-3 from fish meal or they die. So, even typically, and there's studies out there looking at it, typically even farm-raised salmon, which I generally don't eat unless I'm eating sushi. But it's still going to be better than chicken or pork for sure.
Got it. Important nuance there.
Yeah.
Let's come back to the plants. We talked about the different seed oils we want to avoid. What about in their whole food form? If we're having them as nuts and seeds, part of a balanced diet, any issues there?
I'm leaning heavily on Mike Eads. He did an awesome post years ago called Are Nuts Paleo, talking about just this issue, right? And he grew up on a farm, I think in Arkansas, and he talked about harvesting nuts from the trees that grew on the farm. And first off, it was once a year, a couple of weeks. He said it was a huge pain to shell the nuts. His preferred technique was to put them in a canvas bag and drive over them with his pickup truck. Right? So, and then, most nuts, with the exception of macadamia nuts, are very high in omega-6 fats. And, that's fine if you're getting it once a year when they're in season, right? But nuts are a highly processed food. When you go to the supermarket, you don't have to bring a hammer when you get your nuts, right? They're shelled, they're roasted, they're in a little box. You can eat them all year long. That's too much, right? The only ancestral population that fails a glucose tolerance test are the ones where nuts are a significant portion of their diet, right? And it makes them insulin resistant and they tend to have pot bellies. And when they go off the nut diet, the mongongo nuts, their insulin resistance goes away. So yes, I think nuts, I like nuts. I eat them once in a while, but if you're making them a staple part of your diet, that's probably a problem. And lots of the folks in this space they say, one of the things that you should stop eating is nuts. If you're on a low carb diet and you're having trouble losing weight, cut out the nuts. And I would totally agree with that. Nuts should not be a staple for people.
For somebody just becoming aware of what we're talking about today, they've been eating a lot of seed oils for quite a period of time.
Yeah, their whole life, probably.
Exactly. They're going to cut them out at this point. How long does it take for their body to reset and get rid of those?
Great question. So it depends. So different tissues in our body turn over at different rates, right? Which means the cells die off, right? I mean, that's what dandruff is, or your skin. But throughout your body, cells come to the end of their life cycle and they get recycled. So that varies from a couple days for your skin cells to 400 years for cartilage. So yeah, it really depends. I mean, when I fixed my diet, my vision got better pretty quickly. And apparently that's because of the aqueous humor in your eye. Fats can make it in there based on diet pretty quickly. My susceptibility to sunburn went away in 3 weeks. That was a major change and something that I was not expecting. The last change occurred 7 years later. And that was a condition that I had as a teenager, came back and healed. And that was, again, something that I was not expecting. In some tissues, like in adipose tissue, which is obviously where most of these fats are going to be, it's about, they think 680 days is the half-life, right? So what that means is if you have, 6 grams of linoleic acid in your adipose tissue, it's going to take 680 days to get down to 3 grams, and then another 680 days to get down to 1.5 grams. So you're talking about potentially 4 or 5 years to get down to an evolutionarily appropriate level in body, in that tissue, right? And the other problem, so yes, it's absolutely worth doing. Lots of people worry about the fact that, oh my goodness, it's going to come out of my fat tissue and go into my body. You want that to happen because that's the only way you're going to get rid of it. Otherwise, it's going to stay in your fat tissue. I mean, there's no way to keep it in your fat tissue. But if it stays there, it's still going to go rancid, right? And you're going to get, adiposa dolorosa or cellulitis, the orange peel skin. That's also from oxidized omega-6 fats in the skin. So for all the ladies out there, that's not normal. That's because you're eating a crappy diet, like most Americans. So yeah, it can depend. Sad part is for some of us, there are tissues in your body like your cornea, the lens in your eye that are never going to change. And if you've got excess polyunsaturated fat there, it makes you more susceptible to cataracts, right? And there's no way to fix that. No diet's going to change that because that just doesn't turn over. And then cartilage, as I said, the half-life of cartilage is hundreds of years. So, can you improve things? Absolutely, but you can't repair the damage that's happened. So you definitely wanted, in my view, do it sooner rather than later. Because there is damage happening, and some of the damage is irreversible.
So it sounds like basically stopping today, waiting is the key here. Anything we can take supplement-wise, lifestyle modalities like saunas, exercise, taking in more healthy fat, basically anything we can do to accelerate the process of getting these out of the body.
Yeah, to accelerate it, the best thing to do is fasted endurance exercise, right? What they call the Maffetone method, heart rate training, right? Where you keep yourself in the aerobic fat burning envelope of exercise, and then you don't eat. And your body has to burn fat to fuel that, right? I've been doing that for years now, and there's just absolutely no downside to it. And that will force your body to burn the fat, and it preferentially burns off the polyunsaturated fats at about 2 times the rate of the other fats. Foods that you can eat: beef has a lot of carnosine. Carnosine is the most effective antioxidant against HNE. I mean, it even works as a sunburn protectant. If you put carnosine on your skin, it'll protect you from sunburn. Sunburn's caused by the HNE, the omega-6 fats in your severe sunburn is caused by the omega-6 fats in your skin oxidizing into HNE and causing tissue damage, right? And carnosine actually protects against that. They've done human trials on that. Also, fish oils will replace your body preferentially replaces the omega-6 fats with omega-3 fats. So if you're supplementing short term with fish oils, you're going to be giving your body the material to replace the omega-6 fats. And it happens quite quickly. So let's see, what else? Rosemary contains carnosic acid, which is another antioxidant that protects against HNE. So yeah, eat well, eat beef, avoid chicken and pork, and, also too much, one of the things, too much carbohydrates, I think, are not a great thing. In the short term, carbohydrates, they definitely stimulate the oxidation of omega-6 fats, the negative oxidation, right? And so I think a ketogenic diet in the short term is probably a really good idea, just because it's going to force you to burn off fat as fast as possible and get you replacing the fats that are stored in your body and your adipose tissue and your cell membranes.
You mentioned along your seed oil journey, your vision improved, you became more immune to becoming sunburn, and you just got into some of the physiology there with H&E. You mentioned there was something that resolved 7 years down the road. Can you talk about what that was?
Yeah, so when I was a kid, I had Osgood-Schlatter's, which is what they used to call growing pains. And it's basically, I don't know quite how to describe it, but the symptom was I had a lump at the top of my tibia, and, the bone wasn't strong enough. I've since heard that it's a selenium deficiency. Now, selenium is another mineral that protects against lipid fat oxidation in your body. So I've heard that it's a selenium deficiency. I don't know if that's true or not. But, apparently, typically it happens to teenagers. It happened to me when I was a teenager. It got me out of gym through high school, which was great. But then I got into running, and I ran for, 10 years. And then one day I'm running along, and this lump on my knee started hurting again, for the first time since I was a teenager. And I'm like, what the hell's going on here? And I just kept running and ran through it. And, this was something I was very cognizant of, because I couldn't kneel on that knee because I had this lump there that it hurt when I kneeled on it. And then the lump went away. My body finished healing it up and the lump went away. And now I can kneel on it. It's the weirdest flipping thing. Definitely. I don't know why that happened. At the time, I was living in Texas, so I was eating a lot of beef. Maybe it was that, but, it did go away. So I'm happy about that.
So we got deep into the obesity connection with these bad fats. You've talked about all these different health issues that you've overcome when you've gotten rid of them. Early on in the conversation, we brought LDL into it. But what other chronic diseases, and let's go deeper into the LDL piece, and other chronic diseases that we're at risk for if these bad oils are coming in through the diet?
Yeah, so there are a couple of common factors in all of the chronic diseases, right? Mitochondrial dysfunction is one of them. Inflammation is one of them. And HNE is one of them, right? HNE is caused primarily when linoleic acid oxidizes in an uncontrolled fashion in the body. And this can happen anywhere, but typically starts in the mitochondria because that's where the fire is. HNE is very good at crossing cell membranes, so it can get out of the mitochondria and into the rest of the body. It causes damage to the mitochondrial membranes and to the electron transport chain, which is to totally geek out, how your body turns fats or glucose into energy, ATP in your body. It damages multiple components in that chain and can cause you to not be able to produce as much ATP, right? So that gets into, if you have heard of Chris Palmer, he has this hypothesis that a lot of mental illness is caused by decreased energy production in the body. Well, this is how that can happen. There are probably other ways to happen, but this is the low-hanging fruit. That was one of the things that changed when I fixed my diet, which was very embarrassing. Was my mood got much better at work. The guys I worked with, who I'd been working with for years, pointed out, "You used to be a real dick. You're much nicer now." Oh my God, that's horrible. So decreased energy production via mitochondrial dysfunction. Fibrosis is something that happens throughout the body. HNE directly causes fibrosis, so that can happen in your heart. It can happen in your liver. It can happen, in your cartilage. And the HNE is breaking down your cartilage, and then it's reforming as this fibrotic tissue. All of these things are common in all of these autoimmune diseases, right? Amyloid production happens not only in your brain in Alzheimer's, but it happens in your eyes in a couple types of blindness, and it happens in your pancreas in diabetes. And that can be, directly stimulated by HNE production. So and in your heart, that's what heart failure is basically fibrosis of the muscle tissue in your heart caused, we think, by HNE. And there are ways that we can ameliorate these things in animal models. If you stimulate the enzyme that breaks down HNE called aldehyde dehydrogenase, that will ameliorate heart failure and a lot of these other conditions. There's a population, the best example of this as a systemic problem is there's a population of people who have a genetic deficiency in their ability to detoxify HNE, right? They have a mutated version of the aldehyde dehydrogenase enzyme. And those people are, there's a lot of them because it's basically about half of all people of Chinese ancestry have this mutation. And it's the reason that they have, you've heard of the Asian flush when they drink alcohol, right? So the same enzyme detoxifies alcohol as detoxifies seed oils. So what diseases do they get? What are they more likely to get because they can't detoxify seed oils? Heart disease, heart failure, obesity, diabetes, fatty liver disease, right? All the big ones. They're working on some therapies. They have some therapies that they can use in animals, drugs that stimulate the ALDH enzyme, even though you have the defective version of it. There's a model where they, put the human ALDH, the human mutated ALDH enzyme into rodents, and they get all these diseases. And then if you give them this drug to stimulate production of ALDH, then they all get better. So hopefully for those people, there's a therapy. Amusingly enough, one of my co-hosts in my podcast, although he's Irish, he's one of the rare Europeans who has that mutation. And he figured it out in the course of us doing the podcast. And he's Irish, but he doesn't drink because, having this mutation is protective against alcoholism. And he said, oh, well, that's, my father, he never drank very much. He could never understand why anybody became an alcoholic because it was so unpleasant. I was like, you've got the mutation. And he, interestingly enough, if he eats seed oils, he gets the same flush reaction that he does when he drinks alcohol. So yeah, pretty much, autoimmune diseases. I mean, I would argue that type 2 diabetes is an autoimmune disease, that cardiovascular disease is an autoimmune disease. I mean, originally they thought that cardiovascular disease, that seed oils was a treatment for it because it lowers cholesterol. And then they did a couple of RCTs, and the people who got the seed oils were more likely to die of heart disease, not less likely to die of heart disease. So they didn't tell us that. They kept recommending it, right? So then along come the 1980s, and they're trying to figure out why LDL causes heart disease, and they discover that it doesn't kick it off, right? The first phase of heart disease is the production of these sick white blood cells called foam cells, and they couldn't produce foam cells from LDL unless the LDL was damaged. And then they figured out that the damage that happens in your body is oxidized omega-6 fats. Oops. And at the moment, that's the only known cause of heart disease, right? Is these oxidized omega-6 fats. And when you say that, people say, well, that's ridiculous. But heart disease was a rare disease in the United States before we started eating large amounts of seed oils. It wasn't until, the 1920s and the 1930s. I think the AHA was founded in the early 1920s. But the guy who founded it, he said, when I started medicine, nobody got heart attacks. There were no cardiologists. There was no need for it, right? And they've gone through and done time series of autopsies to try and figure it out. And sure enough, people just weren't getting heart disease back then. And if you look objectively at the evidence, it's pretty obvious. Well, now in 2020, the European Atherosclerosis Society publishes something looking at causation, and the three causes that they list are all oxidized LDLs, oxidized versions of LDL that, kick off the process. And then, right. So everybody who has atherosclerosis, they have linoleic acid and oxidized linoleic acid in the atherosclerotic plaques. And as I said at the beginning of this, that's not surprising because your body preferentially delivers those fats to your heart after you digest it. Your heart gets first dibs on taking up the fats. And if you're giving it rancid toxic fats, it shouldn't be surprised that you're getting a bad outcome.
We know LA is found in foods very readily. What is the goal? How much do we want to take that down? Is there a certain percentage we're looking to get within our body of LA and still be thriving? And secondarily, is there an objective test to see where we're at?
Well, the latter part, there's a test called the Omega Quant that looks at your different fatty acids. That's probably the best thing to look at if you want to do a test. I've never done it myself. I don't really, by the time that test came around, I'd already been at this for a while. And, I know what I'm eating for the most part. With the caveat about grass-fed beef, which I'm now learning may not have been as beneficial as I thought it was. So I may be getting more linoleic acid and less omega-3 than I thought I had been, which is kind of annoying. But c'est la vie. But I mean, it's important to remember, as we discussed before, there is no way that you're going to become deficient in linoleic acid. You can become deficient in omega-3 fats, but not in omega-6 fats, right? So there's no reason to worry about that. And since you're getting it in all the foods practically that you're eating, I don't know of any exceptions, but I always say caveat that because maybe there is something out there. But any whole foods is going to have some linoleic acid. So the main thing is about avoiding concentrated sources, in my opinion, right? You want to avoid seed oils, obviously. The thing that got me was salad dressings, which are virtually always made, even if it says creamy, it's made with soybean oil and starch to make it look like cream. It's evil. I'm the type of guy who I once spent my lunch hour in the salad dressing aisle of Whole Foods going through every single bottle to find And I found one single bottle out of the whole aisle that was made with olive oil and no seed oil. So that, so you want to avoid the concentrated sources. Eating out is a concentrated source. Every restaurant is going to cook your food in some form of seed oil. They are not going to use butter. They are not going to use olive oil. They're too expensive. They're going to use the cheapest thing that they can get their hands on. So eating out is a problem. As we've discussed, chicken, eggs, pork, are all problematic because they're feeding them all seed oils and they concentrate them, right? Linoleic acid is like DDT. It bioaccumulates up the food chain. So what should you eat? Ideally grass-fed and pastured, dairy. Lamb, goats tend to be, apparently lamb die when you feed them grain. So they're pretty much all pastured. That's a great thing to do. Wild game, if you can get it, is great because typically it's, eating whatever it's supposed to be eating out there. Obviously, most of the ultra processed foods are out because they're all going to have some amount of seed oils in it. Even things like bread, it's really quite annoying. Seed oils that there was a great consume. There are high oleic varieties that are coming out. My favorite bread company is a company called France in FRNTZ in Oregon. And they make their bread and their, I like hamburgers with hamburger buns. They make their hamburger buns with high oleic sunflower oil, which has very little linoleic acid in it. So there are a couple of, the industry knows all this stuff and they know that their food goes rancid and they are trying to produce better alternatives. These, what they call high oleic seed oil varieties that are really low linoleic acid varieties. So if you see that makes it better, right? Lots of people have constraints on what they can afford. So that's definitely something that's better. Canola oil, while I'm not a big fan of it, is probably one of the better seed oils. I would not cook with it, but, if you're budget constrained, or, I've talked to lots of Indians and they're like, what am I going to do? Canola oil is definitely better. Good olive oil is definitely one of the best vegetable oils. Very stable when cooking, even though we've been told that it's not. And, then fruit, vegetables, dairy, if you do well with dairy. Cheese is great. I can't think if I'm missing anything, but yeah, it's not, the biggest problem with trying to eat healthy in this country is just that it's inconvenient, right? When I started fixing my diet 15 years ago or 14 years ago, whatever it was a huge pain, but now it's much easier because a lot of this stuff has become a bit more mainstream, but and there's, health food stores that give you better options. There's, this company that I work with, Zero Acre, has come out with this very low linoleic acid cooking oil, which is a good option for people. You don't need to buy it, but it's nice to have it out there. In the industry, most of the industry's low linoleic acid oils go into the processed food production because turns out Mars, the candy company, right? One of my favorite snacks was peanut M&Ms. And I found out recently that Mars now uses low linoleic acid peanuts to make their peanut M&Ms. Why do they do that? Because the shelf life is 10 times as long. Because they don't go rancid, right? So they're doing it for the wrong reason, but I'm having peanut M&Ms again, and I like them.
All right, Tucker, we're going to end it there. I appreciate you coming on the show, getting into all this nuance with me. It's been great. I appreciate you. We're going to link up your website, your social media, everything in the show notes. Thank you.
Thank you, Jesse. You obviously really did your homework on this topic. It's a great conversation. Thanks for having me on. It's an honor.
Now that you're done, you're going to want to stick around here and catch this other incredible episode. You don't want to miss it. I'll see you over there.
Dark Calories really tells the story of the biggest scandal ever perpetrated on the American public by a medical organization. And this scandal has affected every American because it's changed how medicine is practiced.